Masculinity for me is this. I am an embodiment of a masculinity.
Let's see what it has to offer. Let's ask. This is the first time I'm actually asking it. If you have power, if you've been bestowed with power, whether it's in contrast to your female counterpart, or even in contrast with your male peers, do not at all think that this is something that makes you a better man, because you're able to utilize something that you did not put any work into to abuse. This is not something that makes you a man. If anything, it makes you less of a man from my perspective.
As one wise man once said, with great power comes great responsibility. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. إيش الأخبار؟ رمضان كريم.
رمضانكم كريم إن شاء الله. الحمد لله.
عيد مبارك. يرحمكم الله.
Not yet.
كل عام وانتم بخير. أهلا وسهلا. عساكم من عوانا.
صحة وعافية.
كل سنة وانت طيب.
وانت طيب.
يا رب.
شو أخبارك يا عمر؟ شو أخبارك؟
أنا كذا I'm done. السلام عليكم to everyone that is watching. Thank you for going through that very lengthy introduction. Yeah, but I have a lot of love to share. Ramadan Kareem, for those that are celebrating and fasting throughout the blessed holy month. Today, we are coming to you with the second episode of the now named Dunes podcast from Sand Dunes. And we have a very interesting topic to discuss with you guys today. Ibrahim, what are we talking about today?
Well, we are talking about masculinity, which is a huge topic. But I think that there are many people who are interested in this. I know this because I'm interested in masculinity and have been for a very long time. And let's see where this goes.
I think almost half of our discussions initially, when we were getting closer to each other, especially during that time at NYU AD, was us bonding over topics of masculinity. So I'm very interested to see where our conversations are going to go. What now? 3-4 years after we started doing that stuff?
Yeah, I think it's about that long. Yeah,
it's been a minute. All right,
time has passed.
Oh Allah. Let's maybe start as maybe any good conversation should start with definitions. What is masculinity? Before I ask you to give us your definition, and before I provide our definition, I think it would be a good idea to ask an interesting friend as of late to define it for us. This, my dear, is Chat GPT 4, the paid version.
Oh,
let's see what it has to offer. Let's ask. This is the first time I'm actually asking it, so let us see. Masculinity is a set of attributes, behaviors, and roles typically associated with men and boys within a given culture or society. It is a social and cultural construct that varies across time and place. Very interesting. Some common characteristics associated with masculinity include physical strength, assertiveness, emotion, stoicism, and independence. However, it is important to note that these characteristics do not define all men. That is true, and they can be embodied by people of any gender. In recent years, there has been an increased emphasis on redefining and broadening the understanding of masculinity to promote healthier, more inclusive, and less restrictive expressions of gender. This movement, often referred to as positive masculinity or healthy masculinity, encourages men to embrace a wider range of emotions, challenge traditional gender norms, and promote gender equality.
That was a mouthful.
That was indeed a mouthful. Mr. Ibrahim, what do you think of this?
Naturally, as with everything, I agree with many of the things that we got from ChatGPT, but I think there is things that I disagree with. And I think particularly because there is more Western vibe to the answer that it has provided. And I think that it will be interesting. I mean, I think we can spend the entire episode today just messing around with ChatGPT with this question and discussing the answers. That would be interesting.
Don't tempt me.
But I think I'm 100% sure that if you were to write on ChatGPT how masculinity is perceived in the West and the East, the answer is going to be very different because the elements of masculinity that ChatGPT has listed are there, but the way we think about them in our culture is very different.
Mm.
And we can
Yep,
elaborate on that as
yep,
we
yep, yep,
proceed
yep.
in this.
And I think it's wonderful, and this is one of the things that we aim to provide through the Dunes podcast, is this perspective from the East, the Middle East, about this type of topics. Finally, so that we can, discuss things from our point of view rather than having to um, import something from a completely different culture. So would maybe I should start with what I believe masculinity is, and then you can bounce off your ideas and your own definition, because I believe I personally mine, although influenced initially, of course, by my Eastern backgrounds. Um, I make the claim that my definition is a bit more objective, regardless of where we are, and that masculinity is an elevated form of being as a man. So this is what a lot of men, from my perspective, should strive to achieve. And the degrees of how much of it you achieve varies from one person to the other. But for me, masculinity, and I can elaborate about this a bit later, it's a set of attributes, it's a state of being that all men should strive to have. These, for me, some of these things, for example, include being a good protector of the people that are around you, being a provider eventually, being someone that is responsible for, the protection of the people around you, whether it's friends, family, or your partner eventually at some point in time. And being ready to sacrifice parts of your comfort in many different forms for the benefit of others, for society to continue moving forward. That's just part of my perspective on masculinity. I'll let you continue. Right.
Okay. My answer is very simple. Masculinity for me is this. I am an embodiment of I'm an embodiment of masculinity.
صلاح الدين الأيوبي in front of me. ما شاء الله. ما شاء الله.
Astaghfirullah. I'm joking. I'm it's just a joke.
Far from the
Look,
truth, I'll tell you.
I think my answer goes in parallel with everything that you have said. I'll just make it more concise. My representation of masculinity is the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam.
That's so.
And the details that you have mentioned in what constitutes masculinity, all of them will be found in the Prophet, regardless of which example you want. The best of example is him, and I think that we can just talk about the Prophet himself in this context. And I would love to elaborate on this, but yes, I think that growing up, he has been a representation of masculinity and everything that is positive about it. And the more I thought about, what that meant for me, the more it changed my personality. And, I still think about it in that form factor till this day.
So are you also from the perspective that masculinity is a holistically positive thing to strive for, and then the negative things that people sometimes might misconstrue with what masculinity is something else? I mean, maybe this could be one of the differences between the Eastern and the Western perspectives.
Oh yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because I think one of the things that people don't understand is masculinity is not just positive; it's necessary in the society. And if you want to term it as how positive masculinity is, I would say it's positive enough that it reached to the prophetic level, and that's a huge claim. But the reason why we're making that claim is because, well, we can think about it in that perspective, because there is a lot of things to learn. What is the role of a man in a society? What is his role in his personal life? What is his role in a family? What is his role as a leader, etc., etc.? And you find all of that conversation happening within the realm of masculinity. And every time you have that conversation, the best example that we would find is the Prophet himself. And everything negative that is ascribed to it, well, there's two ways to say to look at it. One, you could say this is the negative side of masculinity, or more correctly, you would say this is what manifests when masculinity is absent.
Yeah, a
And
lack of
that's and
masculinity. A lack of
yeah,
masculinity,
exactly.
rather.
Because
Okay.
everything negative that they ascribe to masculinity, particularly in the West, because one of the interesting thing that people don't realize, we don't have a lot of conversation about toxic masculinity. This term is going to be important for this conversation because this term does not exist in our society. This is a term that was created by the West and imported in our societies from the West. So the way we're going to have a conversation is very different. Now, there
Yeah.
are problems, but ascribing those problems to masculinity is something that we don't do in our culture. And that is a big difference between the West and the East.
It's certainly starting, or has. It's not starting. It started a while ago, and views of that have trickled down into our society. And not to say that we don't have problems that people normally associate with masculinity. Like there are problems that are committed by men. I think you and I are both from the perspective that these problems often arise because of a lack of masculinity. And later on, I think it would be a good idea to speak about domestic violence or abuse in the household.
Yeah, we can talk about examples,
and how that connects to masculinity. But before we get into the spicy stuff, I want to discuss a bit the transition into being a masculine guy. Because very often, most of the time, people or men are not born masculine. We start off with boys, and then at some point, you become a version of masculine. And in the East, in the Middle East, in our region, from a very, very young age, we are bestowed with the responsibility of being a man. And a lot of people look at that as an immense amount of pressure. And it's something that is negative because it puts up too many expectations for the men. But in reality, I mean, at least for almost every guy that I've spoken to in our region, it's a good type of pressure. And people often realize it as the pressure that is necessary to convert a useless piece of coal or carbon into a diamond. And so from a very, very young age, maybe even from before, like it starts off jokingly when we're very young, and then later on it manifests through our parents in different degrees or in different ways. Them asking us, for example, to, go open the door when a guy comes to pick up something or drop off something because, you're the man of the house now. Your dad is not here. He's at the office or whatever. Go open up the door. Even though, like, the mother is much more capable at protecting her son and protecting the house because she's much older and she's much wiser. But she starts off by putting her boy into these sort of situations so that he can be accustomed to responsibility, right?
Oftentimes what happens,
Yeah.
By the way, when this happens, like I remember when this happened, when I was sent to open the door, I was like, I'm a man, I'm grown up now, right? And the funny thing is, reflecting back on it now, even though I would go to open the door, my mother would follow up because I'm not capable of doing anything beyond that, right? Because I'm just opening the door and he's like, where is your mother? And so she's the one who's like, supposed to answer the door. But just the fact that she has sent me ahead is kind of like, I don't know. It's like she's training us, I would say, or like she's ingraining us with that, with that responsibility that we're supposed to take. Like, and I would go a step further by saying that for many men, this manifests later on in life to becoming a purpose of being, someone who's providing and being in the forefront, taking the heat, taking the challenges of the society in the time, etc. Like basically being the provider and the shield and the protector, etc., etc. It starts at a very young age. We just don't think of it because it just happens subconsciously that we are molded into this, responsibilities.
So would you say it's a correct characteristic that in the process of becoming a man or becoming a masculine man in our region, that it doesn't happen at a particularly discrete, like specified level. It's something that takes form throughout a particular amount of growing up and
Oh yeah.
continuously. Because there are some cultures that have a very obvious, blatant line drawn. Um, uh,
Oh yeah.
there are like there are African tribes that I've heard
Coming of
of.
age. They say the coming of
Yeah, yeah.
age,
There are
right?
African tribes. There are African tribes, I believe, that put their young boys through tests in the wild. Some of them with lions, apparently. I'm gonna look for the name of the tribe. This is someone from SNSP actually that told me about this, where she's from, and that if they make it out alive, then you're accepted into male adulthood. Otherwise, you don't make it. You're not a man. So I think the equivalent of that in our region is that it's something continuous. It's not as discrete. It's something
Yeah,
that's always
it's
there. You're gonna grow up and
yeah,
become a man. You're gonna take care of everyone and whatnot.
yeah. And I think that I agree with it, but I also think that the reason why it's a bit different, because I mean I don't mean to say anything that would offend the people of the tribe and their culture, but I think that the way men take responsibility in our culture is a bit more dynamic, because not everyone takes responsibility in the same way. And I think that sending someone to fight off lions, that is just someone taking initiative and being a man in the more physical form. But from where we come, Middle East, we have a lot of emphasis on the spirituality aspect of it, which is something that is very rare, non-existent, in fact, in the West, because certain attributes in men that are more spiritual are regarded as masculine, such as someone who is modest, or someone who is devoted, or someone who is pious. All of those are considered masculine.
Mm.
Let that sink in. Let that sink in.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There are so many, like the reason that this topic is so interesting is because there are so many dimensions to address, and a lot of them take place subtly, and it doesn't culminate into something unless you start actively discussing what it is exactly that come into play when you're creating this masculine guy. Like,
Mhm.
one needs to think actively of this, and this is one of the things that I believe we should be extremely grateful to our mothers for, which is putting in that amount of effort into raising up these individuals that end up being competent, because they're the people that build this community of men. If you have a society of men that are amazing, and regardless, most of the time it's because the mother has put in so much effort into the thinking process of how to forge this boy into a man through so many ways, and very, very subtle ways. So shout out to all the mothers out there. Thank you very much
May Allah
for
bless them.
all of them. May Allah preserve them, and make sure that inshallah the coming generation is of similar competence to keep on a generation of men like this continuous, inshallah. The
I
the
mean,
the the tribe that I'm talking about apparently is called Maasai, Maasai in Kenya,
Masai.
and
Mm.
intriguingly, uh, they stopped it. It seems like 2016, 2016.
حسدتهم يا عمرو.
Yeah, that's. Man, come on, man. That's opening the door is much less of a daunting task than fighting a lion. So, alhamdulillah, yani, no, this has been relaxed a bit. But yeah,
Yeah.
interesting to see how that transition takes different forms across different cultures.
Yeah, I think this is also different, that or not different. This is also interesting that masculinity, or the way we define it, changes across culture. But anyways, let's change gears a bit. Let's
Yeah,
talk a bit about gender roles,
yeah.
because I think when we talk about masculinity, that is kind of tied off, because really you cannot talk about masculinity without bringing in the other gender, because like you said, mothers, right? They're not men, even though ideally you would think that when we're talking about masculinity, it would be fathers who are more involved. But
Mm.
fathers are more like, instead of being involved in the education, they're more like setting role models. So like they are there to show what it means to take in those responsibilities and juggle everything and be the leaders. And then mothers are like, they're using that example in contrast for that education. So
And
there is
and
always
there
a
are
point of
there are fathers that do both, which I believe is remarkable. But I personally believe the majority of the upbringing of the masculine male is done through the mother. I'm not saying that
yes.
that's the only way for it to exist, because I have seen fathers that are able to do both, but mostly in a traditional society where the father is working and the mother is bringing up the kids, it's normally the mother that creates these
Yeah.
men.
And there's always a point of contrast, right? Because we learn by imitation at a very young age, which is why you see people, imitating playfully when they are kids. And I remember when I was a kid, I always used to look at my father, and I used to pretend to be him by, imitating him. And my mother, she has small clips of me doing that. And when I look at them, it's so funny. When looking at them, I was like, what am I doing? It's like I'm acting all
Yeah,
grown up and walking in a certain way. Like, the way boys walk or
yeah,
kids walk is very different than how, you know, stoic men walk. They just have a different walk. Like,
yeah,
even their walk speaks, like it's part of their personality, right? And
yeah.
as a kid, we are smart enough and intelligent enough to notice that, which is why we're trying to imitate those walks, which is very interesting.
And
Okay,
and you know, so,
we
so,
should
so
more give we should give more credit to the kids because they're just realizing how smart they are.
and I mean, it's both a blessing and something to be wary of, because if you also have a bad role model, you're probably
Yeah.
going to end up being like them as well. We're beautiful imitation machines, especially when we're young children, and then that process becomes extremely difficult to reverse once you've assimilated a particular type of personality. It becomes extremely difficult. That's why I mean, one of the very famous Arabic sayings is that al-waqaya khayrun min al-ilaj, which
Mhm.
is prevention is better than medication. So it's always a good idea to have these conversations, uh, so that early fathers, inshallah, whenever they have their kids, they're aware of what type of individuals they need to be, rather than having their children go through a particular type of transition and then worrying about how to shift them back to the right path. So
Sometimes it's the damage is irreversible.
yeah, I agree. I agree. I agree. A lot of that's actually a very interesting thing to speak about. A lot of people believe that whatever problems come your way, there is always a solution in one way, shape, or form. People often don't take into consideration the bias and inevitability of time. There are things that you cannot shift in the opposite direction. That's why it's extremely important, like you said, to worry about the problems before they occur, so that
Mm.
you don't end up in a situation like that. Since we're speaking about imitation, we're talking about how as boys we look at our fathers and we try to do whatever they're doing, because that's the epitome of masculinity to us. And then you have the mother on the side as well, giving us the theoretical knowledge and giving us the subtle experiences as well to get us to that role model. What would you say is the role or the importance of having good male friends? Is that something that is at all important, or is it something that, if you get it, it's fine. If not, whatever. As long as you have a good father, it doesn't matter.
No, I think it definitely matters. Half of our personality is shaped by how we socialize with people, and majority of our socialization happens with our friends because that is literally our social circle.
Mm.
And just to put more emphasis to it, I would say that there was, like, from theological perspective, we learn our religion from the primary sources, and one of the primary sources is the Sunnah, and Sunnah involves two kind of people: the Prophet himself on one hand, and the Sahaba,
Friends of the
the
prophet. Yeah.
the friends of the Prophet. The it is Sunnah. You could say it is Sunnah to have friends, and
Mm.
the Prophet ﷺ did not use his Sahaba, his friends, just like as audience and followers. he relied on them and their strength. Those people who were around them, they were the best of the people in the time of the Prophet, and they aided him in so many different ways. And if there is only one lesson to learn, that lesson is that you're not supposed to live this life alone. We are social animals and we love to socialize. So why not pick the best that there is when you're trying to socialize? And obviously, as we see with everyone, like my personal experience, my personality has been shaped and catered by the friends that I have. And the more diverse group that I had with friends, the more acceptable internationally, I would say, my personality became as a man, which is very different because
Very interesting characteristic.
I'll tell you why.
For some reason, the first thing I thought of was like an ISO certified stamp on your face. It's like, I'm now internationally applicable to everyone. Okay.
Because the reason I say this is because we see people who I see men who were born and raised in a particular community having a particular mindset. Now, the reason why my mindset has changed is not because of my father, even though he played a crucial role as, you know, being the masculine role in my life. But my father is one man and he belongs to a community. He does not bring as much diversity as my friends brought. And all of the diversity in terms of, like, you know, the flavors of men or masculinity that exists, all of that was
I don't something about the flavors of men is a bit
the flavors of
I don't know.
the
Sure.
flavors of masculinity.
Whatever tickles your boat.
All of that diversity came from my friend group. Some of my friends were from the Middle East, some of them were from Africa, some of them were from Europe, some of them were, you know, a whole group of international people. But, you know, I've learned so many from their culture, and you know how they act out the role of a masculine man.
Yeah.
So yes, my answer is yes, 100%. Friends are extremely crucial when it comes to learning about masculinity, and equivalently damaging. You mix around with the wrong group, oh my god, you're gonna be one sick man. And it goes back to a very simple wisdom in the Middle East. You sit with fire, your clothes end up catching the smoke or the smell of the smoke. You pass by a perfume shop, you're going to end up smelling like perfume. So
and just to add on to that, there's also an Arabic phrase, as-sahib sahib. Two words, so many meanings, which means that the friend is like a pulling force of someone. Like, so if whatever your group of friends around you are doing, are they interested in, you know, becoming, for example, financially independent? Do they want to develop their personalities? Do they want to help around in their society? If you hang around these types of people, you're more likely to go in that direction rather than, for example, being with a group of friends that are only interested in going after women, and that's like their sole purpose in life. That's the only thing that they want to do. Or you're around friends that casually watch and glorify pornography, for instance. If you're hanging around those types of people, you're going to end up doing the same. So I think one of the ways that you can try and shift yourself and shift your experience with friends, and if you want to develop your masculinity in particular, is to find a different group of friends. There's also a saying, this is not Arabic, that I heard this from Ahmed al-Shigeri's series in Ramadan called Seen. Absolutely beautiful. For anyone watching this, I highly recommend that you go watch that show. It's absolutely remarkable. Is that you, as an individual, you're the average of the 5 people that are closest to you. And so when it comes to masculinity, that plays an extremely important role, not only in developing it, but in maintaining it. That's one, because we're going to discuss testosterone in a bit and how it kind of tapers off and decreases as you grow older later. But also, there are experiences that you go through as a guy that women simply will never be able to understand fully and will not be able to empathize with fully. And that's not a bad thing at all. That's why it's extremely important for you to have male, like let's say you're married, for example, it's very dangerous for you to be fully encompassed and encapsulated by your relationship with your partner. And then if you had male friends before, you fully forget everything that was with them and then you cut off. Because that's an extremely important part of Ibrahim. This is not a warning to you, I promise. It's a general thing.
No, I just suddenly remembered some of my friends who got married and then they disappeared, and I'm like, what happened to them? Oh yeah, they got married.
And we have, yeah, exactly. This is something that we really should strive to eradicate. The fact that people are getting married should not at all take away from their relationships with friends. And even though it happens so subtly at first, because again, we don't talk about this as much. People are not made aware of it, that it happens. It just happens and everyone's like, haha, it's a laughing joke and nothing happens. And then on top of that, there are some women, unfortunately, that find that to be a good thing, a positive thing, is that, okay, this is my, husband, my partner. He used to hang around with his friends all the time, but ever since we got married, all he does is spend time with me. Although that sounds like something that is nice and beneficial to you, in the long run, when your guy is removed from the circle of hopefully masculine men around him, you're going to see a completely different type of person, because that person that you were initially attracted to now does not have the same support group, the same feedback mechanism around him to make him the guy that you were attracted to in the first place. So by thinking that you've gained some sort of positive effect by having him with you solely and exclusively, in fact, you've shot yourself in the foot. I don't know what your perspective is on that, Ibrahim. Yeah.
Two things. First, I think we should do a podcast on friendship, because I think there's a lot to talk about. We have amazing friends, and I think it needs to be highlighted, because, and we'll discuss some of the particular things that are associated with this subject that you just mentioned, which is like, completely disregarding the relationship that you had with your friends after you got married, particularly male friends. Second, I think what you've said is just beautiful. And again, I'm going to do one thing. Throughout this podcast, I'm going to keep referring back to the Prophet, because as I said, he has been my role model, right? So just to back up what you've said, take the Prophet as the example. He got married, he had multiple wives, but he had an entire life with his friends, with his Sahaba, and an entire different part of his life was like, for his wives. Like he literally split his time every day for his friends and for his family. So you need to keep that balance.
Yeah.
And the reason why Prophet did this is because لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. He was the best of the examples. So it is certainly possible to do. And I think that hopefully when we have a conversation on friends or the topic of friendship, we'll talk more about this, especially from a female psychology as well, with regards to what you've said, which is like literally shooting yourself in the foot. It's not good. It's not good. And I think majority of the men, they don't understand, nor do they put enough emphasis on friendship. That I think that's very sad. Very, very sad.
When you're living in a society where all you care about is getting married, and that's the ultimate form of existence for you as a guy, and then you end up doing that, you don't care about anything else. You get rid of everything else because you've reached there. That's why a lot of the men that end up getting married let themselves go and become fat. They don't take care of themselves anymore. They don't stimulate themselves intellectually, because in reality, everything they were doing was to reach that end. And once they've reached that end, they're like, yeah, my wife's probably not going to leave me. They don't even think twice about that. And then they just let themselves go. And that's extremely harmful to both the individual, the relationship, and even the society that you're around. Because
100%. 100%.
if you lose everything that you've built so far and you don't put it to use, you don't make something of utility out of it, then you're wasted potential. Everything that was invested in you by your parents, by your friends, by the institutions that you've gone through, whether academic or non. Everything has gone to waste because you now just want to be a married person and you just want to be a consumer in the society that we've built. And that's just such a waste, especially for young males. I'm speaking
Okay,
about.
wait. I'm
Yeah,
cutting you off. Wait, sorry. Two things.
go ahead.
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something.
Tell me two things.
This is a joke between me and Biso. Biso understands
Okay.
this. Every time I call him, I'm like, Biso, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. There is a video. I'll send it to you that refers to this. But anyways, this is عشان عيونك يا Biso. I mentioned this. But anyways, two things. First,
Mm.
I think that we need to stop this particular conversation because I think we're shifting off from masculinity to the topic of friendship. I agree with you, but I think there's also so much interesting things that we can continue talking about with regards to this subject. The second thing is that, again, friends are extremely important in a man's life, and people don't appreciate the role that they have. And if you leave them after marriage, you are disregarding everything that they have provided you and throughout that relationship, and that's not that's very selfish. And I think that we need to have a conversation from a woman's perspective as well, because I
That would
think
be really nice. That would be really
yeah,
nice.
because I think that there is a bit of insecurity in our culture. The majority of the women, they feel that they need to be, they have to be possessive of their male partners, and it is part of their goal. Like they need to achieve that. And amongst female conversation, they actually assess a woman on how possessive she is of her husband, which is not a good thing. It is damaging to both of them. Anyways,
But
let's move
can you,
on.
okay, I'll leave the floor to you because I don't like. I'm glad that you pulled the brakes on this because this is a topic that I'm particularly.
Yeah, we're going down the rabbit hole, and you know, we both love that topic as well. But there's more to talk about for the masculinity, and we'll leave that for another podcast.
Okay.
Let's switch gears and come back to the masculinity. I want to talk a bit about mental health, because I think that's a very important aspect to it. In particular, I want to talk about, because I hold the view that our society over time is becoming more feminine. What do I mean by that? I mean that men are becoming more soft. How am I assessing that? I'm assessing that basically by looking at men and how much responsibility are they carrying. Majority of the men are becoming lazy. They don't want to take as much responsibility as their forefathers used to take. And that is not a good sign. And every time you bestow them with the responsibility, they're like, too much work. Really, I cannot, don't want to do it. Like, you know, and and that's not a good thing. But what I want to talk to you about in terms of mental health is, how do we men deal with mental health? Because like I said, with society becoming more feminine, it seems like majority of the discussion that we have with regards to how we should address our mental health is more catered towards the opposite gender. And I feel like in that conversation, men are left out. And it's not very helpful to just say to young men who, especially those who are genuinely having trouble with their mental health, just ignore it. Just ignore it. Be a man. استرجل يالا. استرجل.
Please, no, please. I love it when you speak Arabic, but not the Egyptian one, please. Yeah. You know, I actually think you're absolutely spot on when it comes to that, because very often this doesn't go. This is more again in the West, but I'll start off there and then I'll move a bit from there. Is that one of the solutions to the struggle of males in the West, which is not as much of a problem in the East now, with that, is embrace your feminine signs. And there's a lot of subtleties that go into that statement. It assumes that a departure from masculinity, which again, we have different definitions for between West and East, a departure from that masculinity towards femininity is going to provide you with a happier life. And this, I think, is something that we're
Oh yeah,
diametrically opposed to. I
100%,
love
100%.
masculinity. I love masculinity. And equally, I love femininity. And I would hate for a society to exist without either of them. Both of them are extremely necessary, from my perspective, to have a functioning society. Because both of them have traits that go hand in hand that actually end up, you know, allowing for a cooperative and collaborative team effort between both of the men and the women to strive towards a better society, a better development. So both of them are extremely important. But in reality, with the definition that we're speaking of, this masculinity, this amazing thing that everyone should strive for and will reach different degrees of, depending on who you are, depending on your atmosphere, and depending on the environment that you surround yourself with. What do you need to do to go closer to that, rather than going to something completely different to make a better man out of yourself? I think that's an important question to answer.
Yeah, tell me the answer.
اتفضل.
اتفضل عطني الجواب يا أخي.
I think
I'm curious to hear.
I can't. I mean, a start of it is to rephrase the problem as that, rather than saying that, you know, the problems that males are suffering when it comes to mental health is because of these immense expectations that are placed on top of their backs in society. And we need to remove these expectations, one, and two, they need to depart from masculinity and go a bit more towards femininity, embracing their inner feminine self. I think an important rephrasing of that advice is extremely important, because I find it fully false, fully false.
Okay, I want to bring in, you know, to add to this conversation, I want to bring in a point.
Yeah. Before that,
and this,
before that, because we were talking about how you know, sometimes the women that have their men fully to themselves and take them away from their friends take pride in the fact that they've done that, because you said the more overprotective they are of their men, the less likely that something, you know, bad could happen. I think something like this is extremely pertinent to share here. Very often, women think that, you know, the guys are up to no good, but in reality, most of the time they're doing the weirdest of stuff with their male friends.
Yeah, I think the worst thing that can happen from a female perspective is like, he's probably thinking about marrying another woman, second wife.
Another conversation, fully other conversation.
But again, this also ties to the conversation that we had just now, like, you know, about friendship and etc. Look, it's not like thinking of it from a male goal of a man to have a woman is something that is biological, and it's intrinsically within us, and it's an extremely strong force that we have within us, right? To be married. And if, like, you know, all credit, well, you have to give credit where the credit is due. For majority of the men, the goal to get married is not an easy goal. It is very difficult for them to get married. And the reason is because at the end of the day, females are the one who decide which man to marry or not, which is why men propose, right? It's like, am I good enough for you or not? And majority of them, they get rejected, right? The rejection is much more frequent for men than women. So it is a difficult goal to achieve, and it is a legitimate goal. For the majority of the men, they strive and they compete against each other so that they can get that woman that they want. And once they do that, they're like, "Halas, we relax, our goal is achieved." But that is not good. That is not good. However, the idea that I want to bring in is striving for female. That struggle, or the striving for getting the female, is a real thing, and it is biological. Like, we're biologically wired to do that. What the West has done is they've used that, and they said the lack of feminine force, because as a masculine man, the more masculine you are, the more important it is for you to have that feminine force within your life. It's just natural. You go in the other direction, you need the balance, which is why life is meant to be spent with, you know, as a couple, man and woman. So the more masculine you are, the more you are in need of the feminine, you know, part of life, in like the feminine side of your life to be present. And what the West has done very conveniently is that, oh, you lack that feminine energy? Well, the easiest solution is try to become more feminine. And that is not helpful. That is not helpful. We are not supposed to take over each other's roles.
Yeah.
And for the women, they have done the same. Oh, you want to become independent? Conveniently, try to become more masculine. To the point that there are literally workshops that teach corporate women how to become more masculine, or to, take in masculine traits so that they become more successful in their career. And there's nothing wrong with it, but what I'm saying is that taking over each other's roles is probably not the best solution.
I think this
Wait,
this
I feel
this
a disagreement. I
this
feel like there is a disagreement. Come on.
I at least disagree with three things that you said.
Okay, tell me.
The first one being that males are biologically wired to want marriage. I don't think that's true. I think they're biologically wired to want females. And
Yeah. I'm saying marriage.
Marriage, that's the contract that you have to go through.
No, I agree. Marriage from a traditional point of view is a whole other thing. But what I meant is more accurate when you said it, which is like, the more masculine you become, the more important it becomes for you to have a woman in your life, regardless of how you're having it. But as a Muslim, I'm going to say marriage because that's the only way I'm going to, morally.
That's the second thing I also disagree with, is that the more masculine you become, the more you need a female partner. I personally don't know if something like that exists. I personally haven't seen this through my friends that have gone through this development of their masculinity. And this is something that I've actively watched throughout the years. And I personally don't think that that's the case. I think what I have noticed, and I'm not going to make a ridiculous claim here, what I have noticed is that the more masculine guys become, the better standards they have for the women that they want. That's the only correlation that I personally see. Whether they need or even want a woman more once they become more masculine, that is something I personally have not observed. But they're certainly more equipped to be able to find a better partner, someone that is going to provide them with, true partnership in the marriage, where they can, if your thing is to have conversations with your partner, or you care about having someone that is able to, build your house from the ground up with you, build a family, take care of you and take care of the children, someone that is loyal to you. Once you become more masculine in its different dimensions, you have better access to these wonderful women. That was the second thing that I disagree on. I disagree not because I don't think it's true, or not because I think it's false in the opposite direction, but because I personally don't think it's substantiated. I don't see like a proof for it, whether anecdotal or scientific. But if there's anything you could tell me about it. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that, because after that.
There is a third point. What is the third point? You disagree on the third point as well?
You can continue to speak. I'll probably remember it. It was one of the last things that you said. I don't remember. We'll get to it. Don't worry about it. We'll get to it.
Anyways, I want to turn this into a debate now, but let's continue the conversation.
That is a different pillar of the Institute of Thought, which, by the way, quick plug-in is, what is the Dunes podcast is part of this initiative, and I've recently started to raise more awareness as to what exactly it is. So if you're watching, Institute of Thought is a very ambitious project that aims to rekindle the flames of intellectual thought and civil discourse in the Eastern region, in the Middle East, so that, these conversations could become something that is normal, so that hopefully we can end up going to a position in society where is better than what is before. Sorry, we're going to go ahead.
Yeah, just make sure that you put a timestamp so we can skip this plugin, okay?
Astaghfirullah al-Azim.
I was looking, where is the skip button? Can we move forward?
I'm editing these videos. I'll delete everything and I'll keep this part only. I'll put it as a YouTube part. That's it.
Okay. Okay. Just to address the second point where you said that if there is any empirical evidence, no, there is no empirical evidence. There is no scientific research on this. It's just that when I say that the more masculine you become, the more essential it becomes for you to have the female counterpart in your life. This is going to become a bit more controversial, but we can skip this for later. I'm just going to say this. For you, when I say you become more masculine, okay?
Say it.
When I say that you become more masculine, I'm immediately associating with it as you becoming more successful, okay? If you are a very successful man, maybe one woman is not enough for you. I'm just gonna say it. I'm just gonna say it.
Ibrahim decided to do it. Ibrahim did it. خلاص ماشي. That's fine.
Let's
Again, a different perspective, which could be equally valid when discussed. We can have a discussion about that. I'm not going to dismiss it myself, of course. But let's talk about testosterone.
Okay.
Very smooth transition. But I think
in what context?
استغفر الله العظيم يا اخي in Ramadan يا اخي. We are in Ramadan يا اخي.
I'm talking about gym.
Okay, خلاص. I'll start off by presenting it's somewhat of an article. It's a publication on the Harvard University website. The Harvard Health Publishing from the Harvard Medical School. And it talks about some of the perils of too little testosterone. I'm just going to read.
Zoom in so it fills the screen because it feels very small.
Is better?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah. So reduced body and facial hair. I think it's important to distinguish between body and facial hair and hair on the head, because like a lack of hair on the head is actually a good sign of your testosterone levels, or at least I was told by my doctor at some point.
No, yeah, that is actually true. Different type, not the same type of testosterone, but yeah, it's the consequence of that.
Loss of muscle mass, low libido, which is your sexual drive, impotence, small testicles, reduced sperm count, and infertility, which apparently is now on the rise worldwide. It's becoming more of an issue across the globe. Increased breast size, that is a problem for men. Hot flashes. Hot flashes
are so basically you suddenly sweat and you feel hot, and it's like you see some men doing that, like they're suddenly like suddenly out of nowhere they start doing that.
This okay, it ties in with this, I guess. Irritability, poor concentration, and depression. Very important thing. The reason I talked about testosterone is I wanted to tie it to this and then something else. Loss of body hair, that's also there. Brittle bones and increased risk of fracture. That's harsh, man. That's a lot. That's a lack of testosterone. So it seems, because we're going to talk about.
I want to suddenly plug in, I don't know, something like Andrew Tate, and he's like criticizes like. I don't want to say it. أنا صايم يا أخي ما أقدر أقولها بس يعني you know it's like.
Called haram. It's called haram with a put more of a it's not haram. Yeah. So it seems like it's worthwhile, and a conversation could be had about women as well, and like testosterone for them, because that's also an important thing. But this is an episode about men and masculinity, so we'll focus on that. It's worthwhile to look into things that affect testosterone levels. I personally know a couple of them, one being a healthy diet, a good balanced diet where you get some protein, meat in particular, B12 is extremely important. And also That's the second part. But before that, like the diet, not only is it about including necessary food so that you can have the macronutrients, a healthy balance of that, but it's also in avoiding a lot of food. And that includes oily stuff, fried food, and a lot of sugary crap. Because that also affects your levels of testosterone in a way. I'm not a medical doctor, but this is stuff that you can research yourself. Exercise as well. This is something else that I will share. Is extremely important as well in boosting your level of testosterone. This paper here, published in Sports Medicine, and you can see this is a pretty reliable number of citations.
Again, can you zoom in so it fills the width of the screen?
Indeed. So this kind of summarizes a lot of what we need to take out of this part. Is it? Can you see it, Ibrahim?
Yeah, I can see it. Does the paper say what's the cause of it? Like, what causes this elevation in the testosterone? With
the exact mechanism, it might. I didn't go into great detail into the discussion, but we can have.
Curious if it's the recovery that is causing this, because I think it is associated with recovery. Like when you're building muscles, I think testosterone are one of the muscles that are essential to the degree that even women at an older age, when they are losing muscle mass due to reaching an old age, they do, like, one of the things that resolve that is to give them hormonal therapy that involves testosterone so that they gain some muscle mass and to strengthen their bones, but it also involves some hormonal therapy that includes I forgot what's the estrogen. Estrogen.
Yeah. And that's also why in parallel it becomes more difficult for men to grow muscles as they grow older, because their levels of testosterone just biologically goes down by about 1% to 2% every single year. That's why if you're a young guy tuning in and watching us, do not waste your youth. Do not wait. This is one of the issues that we spoke about earlier in the podcast, where we talked about irreversible damage. You know,
if there is one thing that you need to take from this podcast, it is this message: do not waste your youth.
Do not waste your youth, because you have so much potential. You could think of testosterone as this, power hormone, this power boost. Think of it as your natural Red Bull that you've been bestowed with as a gift in your body as a guy. And if you make use of it, it can help you with so many things. It could provide you with a particular mindset that allows you to push yourself to limits beyond what you could ever think, as long as you're able to develop it. But it also keeps you healthy. So it's not only a benefit to have, it's necessary for you to have good testosterone levels. Because like we saw earlier, depression was one of the outcomes of a low level of testosterone. So things you need to do that we can tell you about is to watch your diet, eat healthier, eat a more balanced diet that has protein. God has bestowed us, alhamdulillah, with so many beautiful things that we can consume and eat. So make use of that. And also, give your body the attention that it deserves by exercising whatever way. It doesn't have to be resistance training. You don't have to weight lift, although that does have a great effect on your testosterone levels in particular.
Yeah.
Just exercise and make sure that you stay healthy. And that directly affects your testosterone levels so that you end up becoming someone that can achieve much more of your potential.
Okay, just a quick disclaimer. We are not suggesting at all that you should go and buy synthetic testosterone and start injecting yourself with it. That is not.
Don't do that crap. Don't do that crap.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah, that is not the answer. We are saying that you need to utilize the natural resource that you have, and there are ways that you can elevate those natural resources in natural ways, and you should aim to do that, because the way the biochemistry behind them works is very different than synthetic testosterones. Don't do the synthetic testosterones; they're very harmful.
Yeah.
So that's a quick disclaimer with regards to that.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you pointed that out, because there are also like important disadvantages and shortcomings of having too much testosterone, which happens when you over inject yourself with external stuff. That's like if you keep it natural and you just keep working on yourself,
if you keep it natural, you cannot have excess, because the body knows how to regulate, self-regulate.
It's not possible. Yes. Yeah. We should actually invite some of our doctor friends to talk about this more in detail. Let us know if you're interested in a medical discussion about this. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the internet, but if you want a concise, better presented things from more specialized people about this topic, please let us know. We'll be glad to provide. Maybe we could provide it on Instagram. I'll put the tag of our Instagram somewhere here if you're interested. Yeah, Ibrahim, I'm thinking of switching gears once more to an important topic. Do you have something to say about this before we move, or is there something that you want us to transition to?
All right.
So I think and this might be one of the last things that we speak about, maybe one or two more. I think it would be a good idea to speak about a lack of masculinity and how that presents itself in a guy. And one of the worst things that I believe we both share in opinion is that a lack of masculinity often showcases itself as domestic violence. Very smooth transition, I know.
you just dropped a rock. No, not a rock. You just dropped a boulder. I know, like a smooth transition. Fine.
But yeah,
let's transition to it. Like, you literally kicked the door open. So yes, let's discuss this. But I think in order to address this, I think it is important to mention a couple of things.
Yeah.
When we say masculinity, one of the things that comes with masculinity is your moral character. It has to be good. A bad moral character doesn't mean that it's bad masculinity or toxic masculinity. It just means you lack masculinity. If someone and the reason why I can say this with so much confidence is because I have the primary resources that theologically tells us the importance of this, and I'm going to cite it to them. First of all, the Prophet, let's start with the ayat. In the Quran, every time you see someone is losing control over their emotion, Allah addresses it as someone who is jahil, which is not a small claim. And the first example I'll give you is of Musa alayhi salam. When Musa alayhi salam came to his people and he said, "In Allah ya'murukum an tadhbahu baqara," Allah is commanding you to slaughter a cow. The story you can look up as to why he was commanded that. His people responded, "Atatakhidhuna huzwa?" Are you joking with us? This is Allah's command, and the response is, "Are you joking with us?" As if the Prophet has the liberty to joke around with commands of Allah. So naturally, Musa alayhi salam took offense, and he became angry. And we know from Musa alayhi salam's story that he was a man who did not tolerate wrongdoing. And he was someone who used to get angry to the point where at some point he punched someone and the person died. So, and Musa alayhi salam knew that this was, Musa alayhi salam was a strong man. Musa alayhi salam knew that he has this problem. Anger was a problem to him, and he was someone who acknowledged it and someone who kept it in check. And we know this because when his people said that "Atakhidhuna huzwa," Musa alayhi salam's response was, قال أعوذ بالله نكون من الجاهلين. I seek Allah's refuge to be from amongst the jahilin, people who are jahilin. And we normally think that jahilin is someone who lacks knowledge. That's not the case. Jahil is a person who lacks control over his emotion. Another example, in case you were not convinced, Nuh alayhi salam, when he was riding his ship and he invited his son to ride with him, and the son refused, and the son later on was drowned in the waves of the ocean when Allah sent his torment. After everything was settled, Nuh alayhi salam said to Allah, قال رب إن ابني من أهلي وإن وعدك الحق وأنت أحكم الحاكمين. He said, Allah, you promised me that you're going to save me and my family, and my son is amongst my family. Allah's response was, قال إنه ليس من أهلك إنه عمل غير صالح. He is not from amongst your family. And then Allah said, ولا تسألني ما ليس لك به علم. don't ask me that which you don't have knowledge of. إني أعظك أن تكون من الجاهلين. I warn you to be amongst the people, because Nuh alayhi salam is a father, and a father seeing his son dying in front of him is not something easy. So the emotions overtook him, and he asked Allah for that. And then when Allah responded in that way, Nuh alayhi salam acknowledged that he became emotional, and he said, أعوذ بالله نكون قال ربي إني أعوذ بك أن أسألك ما ليس لي به علم وإلا تغفر. So he repented from asking Allah something out of emotion. Now, this doesn't mean that being emotional is something that is a taboo in our religion, but not having a control over emotion is something that is negative. And then, just to complete this whole thing, I'll give you a narration of the Prophet. The Prophet ﷺ said, ليس الشديد في السرعة إنما الشديد الذي يملك نفسه عند الغضب. Like, you are not strong because you are someone who becomes angry. And in teenage years, majority of the men, they think that, I'm a man because he's showing his anger and he's asserting with his anger. The Prophet ﷺ clearly says that does not make you a man. What makes you a man is the fact that you know that you can be assertive in a situation and you decide not to. That is what makes you a man. So yes, in our religion, theologically speaking, we are taught and we are encouraged to have control over our emotions. And a good masculine man is someone who is stoic, has complete control over his emotion. Someone who is a perpetrator of domestic violence is not a good example of a masculine man.
Yeah. Because I mean, I'm so glad that we transitioned into that, because the ability to control one's emotions, given the blatant physical advantage that males have been bestowed with, is absolutely necessary for a safe society. And this superior biological prowess was not provided to us so that we oppress people. It's the exact opposite. It's to fight oppression. It's to protect, and that includes people from the family and people from the community. If you're ever going into a battle, if you're in war or something like that, and also to remove things that require physical prowess from being a burden on the woman, whether it's stuff that you could do in the household by taking the groceries from, like, that's what a gentleman does in our, like, in my household. A guy doesn't let a woman lift a feather. Like, you don't do that. You're raised to carry everything for your woman, for your mother, or even just a female friend. Even if that's the case, you don't allow them to carry something, because you've been bestowed with a gift and you need to make the best use out of it. And so when people abuse that gift, and believe that they're in control and they're more masculine because they've oppressed someone, and not just anyone, they've oppressed the person that has given them full trust in being their partner and being someone that they depend on, I cannot think of something that is more cowardly. So make sure, if you ever come across these people, to let them know that, hopefully, by starting to advise first so that perhaps they can change. But this is something that should never be tolerated, because this is the work of cowards. And the advocacy for masculinity that me and Ibrahim are advocating for is part of the reason of it is to prevent people like that from coming into fruition in our society, both for the benefit of the family and the community equally as well. So if you have power, if you've been bestowed with power, whether it's in contrast to your female counterpart, or even in contrast with your male peers, do not at all think that this is something that makes you a better man, because you're able to utilize something that you did not put any work into to abuse. This is not something that makes you a man. If anything, it makes you less of a man from my perspective.
As one wise man once said, with great power comes great responsibility.
I think that was Spider-Man. Yeah.
No, look, the thing that me and Am are advocating in general, holistically in this podcast, is just responsibility. And jokes aside, it is a responsibility on men. And the more responsibility that you take, the more capable you become, the more masculine you become. So we are advocating young men to be more responsible and think about these types of things. Think about how you can be a better human being. Every day is worth living if you are improving. But if you're not improving, then what's the point of living?
Yeah.
Like if you reflect back on yourself as to who you were yesterday and who you are today, if it's the same, then why did you live this one day? What did it add to you? And if you keep reflecting on that, it's theologically it is essential for us to do that. Tadabbur. You have to
Yeah.
do it. It's not something that is optional that Allah has given you. Allah has asked you, وَلْيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِ. So it is essential for us to think about these types of things and take on responsibility. It's also something that gives us purpose. People who have more responsibility, not just people, like specifically men who have taken on more responsibility are genuinely happier because they have a purpose in life. And those who lack responsibilities are just sitting there thinking as to how to waste more time and just, committing more and more sins.
Yeah, and then they realize that they're not living a fruitful life because unfortunately, either they were not developed into a guy that can take up that responsibility. So also, if there are any women that are watching this, please ensure that you raise a generation of boys that are able to take up responsibility so that they can take on the harsh challenges of society. And I promise you, from someone that was raised to be responsible, this is something that we enjoy doing. It's not at all a pressure. We're glad that we're doing it. And especially if there's a supportive environment around us of women or of similar men, similar like-minded men, that ensure that we continue this process and that they're motivating us, giving us props for whatever we're doing, because that's also an important part. Like it's very important to give credit where credit is due. Sometimes in the Arab world, for example, an instance, the guy does things that are expected of him in society, but because it's expected, people do not
take
give
it for granted.
gratitude. They take it for granted and they don't provide the gratitude that is necessary. In the same way that, for example, when a mother puts in so much effort, let's say a mother that chooses not to pursue a career, for example, and focus on fully developing her children into amazing members of society. And then her children take that stuff for granted and never thank her enough. I mean, you do that as a teenager when you're a child, but then later on, when you're doing things that go in the opposite direction to what you were provided with you being ungrateful, with you raising your voice, with you speaking disrespectfully because you're now this great guy, when in reality you're nothing without this woman. That's not something that we should be doing.
That's not masculine. That's not masculine at all.
Thankful.
Yeah, imagining that type of a guy, it seemed like that's disgusting.
Yeah.
But again, this is not something that is dissociated from the society. This involves everyone. It's not, we're talking about masculinity, but don't be mistaken that this is something that is limited to the men alone. Women have equal, if not more, interest in men being more masculine. So whether you're a mother, daughter, sister, or wife, regardless, the men who are around you, encourage them to be more masculine by telling them to be more responsible, taking up more responsibility, etc., etc. You will find that rewarding in your life as well. And let's work together. Let's work together, like men and women, like men who have men around them, like friends or brothers, whoever they are. Tell other men around you to push for more. You are capable of doing much more. And the more they do, the happier they become, and the more happy everyone else becomes. It's just like you have a sense of pride. It's like, that man is capable of so much more. He's a useful man.
It's a beautiful feedback loop. We just need to ensure that the effort that is put into creating these masculine men is equal to the responsibilities that we're giving them. You don't provide them with so many responsibilities when in reality that boy has not been developed into a man. I'm going to finish off by because we've spoken a lot. I'm just going to finish off by giving a particular piece of advice that I have found to be extremely beneficial to me and my friends. If you haven't heard of the term Stoicism before, please research into it. And it's the ability to maintain yourself and to maintain your composure emotionally when life isn't going your way. That's extremely important to have as a man, because life will punch you endlessly, endlessly, regardless of what background you come from, whether you think you're, financially happy for life and your parents are providing for you, whatever it is you think you're in, there will be challenges regardless of what it is. And the more stoic you become, the better equipped you are to deal with these problems. And it's extremely important for you not only to develop in yourself, but to develop it in the people around you, so that you can become a center of support for the members of your community. When people come with their problems and they complain to you about them, you're someone that is able to maintain composure and provide them with advice, provide them with help, because you need pillars in society for it to be stable and for it to move forward. If everyone reacts emotionally extremely to everything, that's chaos. That's pretty much chaos, both for the other members and yourself as well. So look into Stoicism and work on developing your masculinity and developing the masculinity of the other boys or men in your life. Do not look down upon things that seem, perhaps feminine for some reason as of late, like learning and reading things and, looking into literature and stuff. As of recent, in some places, at least in our region, it's been looked at as, something feminine, which is, it's horrible. It's such a horrible idea. So backwards thinking, the people that end up, unfortunately, in that trap, when in reality, you need to be someone that is well-versed with the community around you. You need to be someone that is constantly developing yourself so that you can become an effective member of society. With that, we put a period and stop on this podcast. Mr. Ibrahim, as always, thank you very much for sitting down with me and having this very lengthy conversation. It's always a pleasure. And inshallah, looking forward to more of this.
Thank you so much.
Ramadan Kareem.